In the hidden temples of the East, where jungle vines wrap around crumbling statues and lotus ponds reflect no stars, there are stories too sacred or too cursed to speak aloud. This is where the dead return in familiar faces, but with smiles too wide and eyes that never blink. Where sacred chants, when whispered backwards, do not bless, they invite. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a channel where every tale is drawn from forbidden rituals, ancient fears, and spiritual taboos buried deep within Asian folklore. Tonight, we open the story of the monk who chanted backwards, a man of devotion who prayed the wrong way and opened a gate that should have stayed shut forever. The sun had already slipped behind the trees by the time the novice arrived. His name was Kam, just 17, sent from the provincial temple to deliver herbs and rice to Wat Sai Thong, a lonely monastery nestled between the hills of northern Laos. The air was thick with mist. Bamboo leaves rustled without wind, and as he walked the winding path through the forest, the novice felt something pressing against the back of his neck, like the stare of someone invisible. Wat Sai Thong was supposed to be empty. It had been a solitary monk's residence for years now. Pra Sila, a reclusive elder known for fasting, silence, and meditation so deep he once claimed to hear the breathing of ghosts. No one had seen him in nearly 2 months, though the local villagers often left offerings at the gate. When none had been collected for weeks, the abbot from Kam's temple sent the boy to check. The wooden gate creaked open with too much ease. The courtyard was quiet. The incense bowls were full of ash, and the air was wrong, still, stale, like a room where prayers had been whispered too long and never released. Kam stepped into the central hall. That's when he saw him, Pra Sila, seated in full lotus, hands resting on his knees, robe folded neatly across his chest. His eyes were open, wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead as if into a mirror only he could see. His skin was pale, but not rotting. His lips were slightly parted, as though mid-chant. At first he thought he was meditating, but the longer he looked, the more still the body became. There was no rise in the chest, no twitch of the eyes, no breath. Then he noticed the flies, not landing on the body, but hovering, circling, as if unsure. Something else was wrong. The candles hadn't melted, not one. They stood as they were, tall, fresh, unused, as if time had been paused in this room. Kam stepped into the central hall. Then something strange, the faintest twitch of Pra Sila's lip, a tremor, a whisper. The monk's mouth moved. No sound came out, but the lips moved, slowly, rhythmically. Kam stumbled back in fear. He dropped the bundle of rice. The copper pot clanged loudly across the floor, but Pra Sila did not blink, did not move. Only the lips continued their ghostly murmur. Kam ran. The villagers gathered the next morning, summoned by the boy's story and his pale, shaking face. Some were skeptical. Others had always believed Pra Sila was not entirely of this world. A few refused to come near the temple at all. Still, a small group entered the monastery. Pra Sila remained seated, unchanged. Days had passed. The body showed no signs of decay. His posture was perfect, his expression blank, serene, almost too serene. But most disturbing of all, his lips were still moving. The village headman suggested a proper cremation, a respectful release of the soul. The monks from the main temple were sent for. A pyre was built. Prayers were read. The body was placed upon the wood. The fire was lit, and yet it did not burn. Smoke rose. Flames danced, but Prasila's body remained untouched, as if wrapped in invisible silk. No heat marked his flesh, no skin blistered. After 3 hours, the fire burned out on its own. The wood crumbled to ash. The body remained seated, still smiling, still whispering. The villagers whispered too. That night, a bell rang. The old bronze bell atop the temple. It hadn't been used in years. No one had pulled the rope. It rang once, then again, then again. 12 times, a number sacred to ritual, a number tied to cycles, to endings, to portals. Calm, lying awake in the kuti, felt the sound crawl into his ears and lodge behind his eyes. He clutched his prayer beads tightly. He could hear something else in the bell, not just metal and echo, but breathing, like someone exhaling through the chime. He did not sleep. By morning, a dog had gone missing, the village elder's favorite, always sleeping near the altar. A trail of blood led from the temple steps to the riverbank, but there were no footprints, only claw marks. The bell rang again that afternoon, 3 times. This time, the sound made Calm's nose bleed. Others reported dreams of black water and mouths without faces. And Prasila still sat, unmoving, lips trembling in reverse. The abbot arrived on the 3rd day. He was old, worn, a man who had seen much and spoke little. He entered the hall alone. He stayed for 2 hours. When he emerged, his hands were shaking. He did not speak for a long time. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "This is not decay. This is a doorway." More candles were lit, more prayers were read. Holy water was sprinkled across the walls. The Buddha statues were cleansed, offerings were doubled. Still, nothing changed. Prasila remained untouched by time. And that night, the firelight in the hall revealed something no one had noticed before. His shadow moved. Not with the flicker of flame, not with the shift of light. It moved independently. Sometimes it leaned forward while his body stayed still. Sometimes it looked back. The villagers began to avoid the temple after sunset. It wasn't spoken aloud, no formal warning was issued, but something unspoken passed between them, like smoke under a door. A look, a tightening of the jaw, a sudden excuse to go home early. The boy Cam still stayed, as instructed by his abbot. He cleaned the steps, swept the fallen leaves, lit incense in the mornings, but his eyes had changed. He no longer looked directly at Prasila's body. He passed quickly through the prayer hall, careful not to let his shadow fall across the unmoving monk. By day, the monastery seemed almost normal. Almost. But when dusk fell, something shifted. The air thickened. The insects stopped chirping. The lanterns flickered even when there was no wind. And every night, the bell rang. Once, twice, sometimes more. Always without warning, always without a hand to pull the rope. The sound was hollow, old, and full of something that did not belong. It wasn't the bell itself that frightened the villagers. It was what happened afterward. On the 5th night after the failed cremation, a widow named Mei Yai was the first to speak of it. She came to the temple gate at dawn, barefoot, shaking, eyes swollen with tears. She claimed she had seen her husband. Her husband had been dead for 3 years. "He came to my window," she whispered, "but he didn't knock. He just smiled." She said he looked the same, wore the same shirt he was buried in, even smelled of sandalwood. But something was wrong. His mouth stretched too far, the smile was too wide, the teeth too many. His voice was soft, like a child learning to speak, and everything he said was backward. Cam asked what he said. Mei Yai closed her eyes, trembled, then said, "Nokni them, mut them, mi ai bojong. The birds are full, the bones are empty. I am not buried." Then she collapsed. She was found dead the next morning, face down in her water jar. No signs of struggle, no footprints around the house, only her own handprints on the rim, as though she had leaned over and willingly fallen in. The villagers were quiet for days. The abbot declared the monastery off-limits after dark. A talisman was hung on the gate. Salt was sprinkled along the path. Prayers were whispered louder. But the bell kept ringing. Others began to report dreams. One man dreamed his mother was cooking in the kitchen, her back to him, humming a lullaby. But when he called to her, she turned, and her face was gone, just skin pulled tight over bone. She spoke in riddles. When he awoke, he found muddy footprints on the floor of his hut, leading from the door to his bed. A child woke screaming from a nightmare of smiling men with empty eyes. Another boy drew pictures in the dirt of people walking backwards, heads turned upside down. The local shaman was brought in. He walked the perimeter of Wat Sai Tong, sprinkling ash and burning herbs. He did not enter. He left a single sentence: "The gate is open the wrong way." The abbot returned again, this time bringing a ritual drum and 7 young monks to perform a protective chant. They began the prayers in the courtyard, but no sooner had the 2nd verse begun than the bell rang, loudly, jarringly, though no one was near it. It interrupted the chant. One of the monks fell to his knees, clutching his ears. Another began to laugh, loud, strange, joyless laughter that turned into choking. The abbot shouted for them to stop. They left before the sun set. That night, Cam found the drum had split down the middle, as though struck from within. He couldn't sleep. The shadows in the hall had grown longer, and sometimes they moved when he did not. That same week, 2 fishermen drowned in shallow water. Their bodies were found with mouths full of river stones, eyes wide open. When brought to shore, villagers claimed the bodies smiled, too wide, teeth too perfect, like masks pulled over something else. The village elder, once a skeptic, summoned Cam privately. He told him a story. Many years ago, before Priscilla ever arrived, another monk had lived at Wat Sai Tong, a man known only as Luang Po Kam Lai. He was gentle, respected, but deeply curious. He studied old texts, not the kind kept in glass cases, but the ones hidden beneath floorboards, wrapped in oilskin and sealed with wax, forbidden chants, cursed rituals, writings said to be copied from spirits, not scribes. It was said that Luang Po Kam Lai had tried to reach the other side, not to become enlightened, but to see what lies behind enlightenment. One day, he vanished. No body was ever found, only a single line carved into the altar with his fingernail. Every prayer is a door, but some opened the wrong way. The monastery remained empty for years until Priscilla came, and now, it seemed, history was repeating. On the 7th night, during the full moon, the bell rang 13 times. Cam woke with blood in his mouth, his nose, his ears. He saw footprints outside his window, barefoot, wide-spaced, as if someone had danced there. He lit a candle and opened the door. No one. But in the distance, near the temple steps, he saw Priscilla's shadow. It moved. It walked away from the seated body. It passed behind a pillar. It did not come out the other side. When Cam returned inside, something cold brushed his shoulder. He turned. No one there. But on the wooden floor behind him were wet footprints, walking backwards. The morning after the 13th bell, Cam awoke with a taste of metal in his mouth. Blood had dried under his nose. His fingers trembled. Something had followed him home in his dreams, a whisper that echoed not in his ears, but beneath his skin. He found a strand of long gray hair on his blanket. It was not his, and he slept alone. That same morning, while sweeping the main prayer hall, he noticed a drawer slightly ajar in the altar. It was never left open. The monks kept it sealed with string and a waxed talisman pressed flat against its wood. Now the seal had peeled away, as if heat or moisture had undone it. Or something else. Inside the drawer was an old reel-to-reel recorder, heavy and dust-coated, with a paper label wrapped around the spool in faded Laos script. One word stood out: Wiwat. The word was ancient, from Pali root. It meant to invert, to reverse, to turn back that which was moving forward. Cam showed the recorder to the abbot. The old monk went pale. He ordered all junior monks out of the room and carried the device into his private quarters. For hours he sat alone with it, listening, staring. He emerged at dusk, eyes red, voice quiet. He was chanting, the abbot said, but not the way we chant. The recording, now carefully transferred and analyzed by a scholar from the main monastery, confirmed it. Priscilla had been reciting a mantra known to monks throughout Theravada tradition, but he had been chanting it in reverse, not only phonetically backward, but syllabically mirrored. Every tone, every sacred pause, every vibration meant to invoke protection, now turned inward. An audio technician was brought in by the university, not for spiritual reasons, but to identify anomalies. What they found chilled even the most skeptical. Underneath Priscilla's voice, beneath the chant, was a second layer of sound, a low hum, not mechanical, not feedback. It was something that pulsed with the rhythm of speech, but did not match any voice, not human, not animal. One expert described it as a harmonic signature that does not obey natural physics. Another whispered, off the record, "It sounds like something answering." For 7 nights, Priscilla had chanted this inverted mantra from sunset to sunrise, alone in the temple. Why? The scholar explained a dangerous theory. There were whispers in old monastic circles of a Wiwat Vinyan, a ritual that could reverse the path of merit and pull back that which had passed beyond. It was forbidden, not because it was false, but because it worked. But it came at a cost. You could call something back, but you couldn't control what answered. The village began to fracture. Some demanded the body be buried immediately. Others feared touching it at all. Meanwhile, the tape continued to be studied. The abbot warned the younger monks never listen to the full chant, never let it play uninterrupted. But one did not listen. His name was Chan, curious, restless, brave in all the foolish ways youth tends to be. One night, while alone in the study room, he played the tape. All of it. The reel spun, the room dimmed, the candles flickered, and then stood still. No wind, no movement, only the reversed chant echoing through the wooden beams. Chan was found at dawn, unconscious, nose and ears bleeding, his eyes rolled back, white. When he awoke, he spoke only in reversed Lao. Backwards sentences, backwards prayers, even his screams were inverted. The villagers brought a healer, then another, then a priest. Nothing worked. He began drawing spirals on the walls, then on his skin, carved in shallow blood. When asked what he saw, he said, "The space between syllables, that's where the teeth are." Worse, the playback device wouldn't stop. After being unplugged, it continued to spin. Even when smashed with a hammer, its spool rotated once more at midnight. And on the final rotation, just before it went still, the bell above the temple rang once, and every mirror in the dormitory cracked from the inside. Kam began to suspect the chanting had become more than sound. It was an invitation, each word a key, each reversal a knock. He remembered something the elder had once said, "Every prayer is a door, but reverse it, and you don't leave, you let something in." That night, he dreamed of the monk, but in the dream, Prasila was upside down, feet on the ceiling, hands clasped in front of him, chanting, not out loud, but inside Kam's head, softly, relentlessly, "Namah Arahant, Tna Harahaman." He awoke vomiting. The vomit was black, not blood, not bile, but thick like oil, and inside it, a human tooth. In the days that followed, more villagers heard strange voices at night, whispers through bamboo, laughter echoing through cooking pots, children murmuring prayers in their sleep, words their parents had never taught them. At the temple, Prasila's mouth moved more frequently. His skin remained intact, but now the tips of his fingers had begun to blacken, as if burned from the inside out. And when Kam dared to approach the body, only for a moment, he heard something that made him collapse to his knees. A whisper, right into his mind. "Keep chanting. You haven't finished opening the door." It began with dreams. But these were not the simple, misty dreams of grief. These were vivid, too clear, too sharp. The dead returned, one by one. They knocked on doors long sealed, walked barefoot through rice fields, waited at windows, and they spoke. But their words were twisted, riddles that turned in on themselves, phrases that echoed even when no sound was made. One man claimed he saw his sister, who had died in childbirth the year before. She was standing knee-deep in the lotus pond, her arms stretched out, her hair flowing like river grass. But when he called her name, her mouth split open too wide, not down, sideways, revealing not teeth, but more tongues. She whispered, "You pulled me through wrong." He hasn't spoken since. In the village, a 7-year-old boy named Noi began drawing faces in the dirt. They had no eyes, only mouths, dozens of them, stacked across the forehead, cheeks, neck, all smiling, all open. When his mother tried to wipe the drawings away, he screamed so loudly the neighbor's chickens died, all at once. That night, he went missing. His sandal was found the next morning, floating in the village pond. There were bite marks around the strap, human, but too small and too many. The water turned red. The monks tried another purification ritual. This time they recited the full mid-chant, a prayer of loving kindness known for its power to calm restless spirits. They lit candles, burned sacred herbs, and walked the perimeter of the monastery barefoot, barefoot, barefoot. But something walked with them. A flicker of motion just behind the last monk, a shadow where no one stood, a cold breath on the back of the neck that never warmed. And as they reached the final turn of the temple grounds, the bell rang. Not 12, not 13, 17 times. A number with no meaning in their faith. A number that should not be spoken. That same night, a woman awoke screaming, claiming her dead daughter had crawled into bed beside her. But the child smelled of river mud. Her hands were wet, her voice a dry hiss. She kept asking if I remembered her teeth. She said she gave me some, and now she wants them back. The woman tore at her own mouth. 2 of her molars were missing, not pulled, gone, as if they'd never been there. The villagers grew restless. Some fled to stay with relatives. Others packed salt into their homes, hung talismans on every door, stopped cooking at night. But it wasn't enough, because the visions weren't staying in dreams anymore. They were bleeding through. One boy was seen speaking to his grandfather outside the old granary. The man had died 2 winters ago. When asked what they spoke about, the boy answered, "He told me the door is stuck, and the ones waiting behind it are getting impatient." In the temple, calm grew thin, pale, quiet. He heard the chants even when no one was speaking. He found himself whispering lines of reversed prayer without meaning to, while cooking, while bathing, even while asleep. The other monks grew wary of him. One moved out of the dormitory altogether, claiming Kam spoke in 2 voices at night. Frasila's body had changed. It was still seated, still lifelike, but his mouth was no longer simply moving. It was smiling. A grin stretched across his face, too large for a man who had taken vows of silence. His gums showed, his lips cracked, and when Kam walked past, he swore the monk's smile followed him, shifted, tilted, grew. The abbot summoned a former exorcist monk, now retired and living near the Mekong. He arrived in silence, old, barefoot, his eyes clouded by time, yet sharper than anyone expected. He did not ask to see Frasila's body. He asked to see the bell. They brought him to the tower. He placed a single string of black prayer beads at the base, sat, closed his eyes, and whispered, something climbed through. He later explained that reversed mantras are not merely errors, they are tools, used in the rarest of rituals, mostly for unbinding curses or forcing malignant spirits to retreat. But if used for the wrong purpose, especially over 7 nights with no breaks, you don't repel spirits, you call them, but not from heaven, not even from hell. You call the ones in between. Calm dreamed again, this time of a river, dark, endless, flowing not with water, but with teeth. Thousands of them, floating like petals, grinding against each other, clicking, 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 like prayer beads made of bones. In the center of the river sat Frasila, but upside down, head submerged, feet above the water, chanting backwards, louder now. From the shore, dozens of figures watched. They wore the faces of the dead, but their eyes were on fire. When he awoke, he found his own prayer beads broken in his bed, scattered, and a tooth, another tooth, still wet, but not his. The final sign came from the altar. The Buddha statue, long untouched, began to weep, not tears, but blood, from the corners of its eyes, slow, silent, sticky. No one could explain it. No one dared to wipe it. Even the abbot stood back. That night, the bell did not ring. The wind did not blow. The candles did not flicker. But the shadow of Frasila stood up and walked out of the prayer hall.
The old exorcist, Luang Pi Thanom, stayed behind after the others had left. He sat cross-legged beneath the stupa, unmoving, lips pursed. Ham offered him water and incense. He took neither. Instead, he stared at the prayer hall where Prasila's body remained, serene, silent, and smiling. When he finally spoke, it was with great reluctance, as if the words themselves could stir something awake. He performed the Wiwat mantra, and he did not stop. It was a name none of the younger monks had heard, not even Ham. The abbot, however, froze. His hands began to tremble. "That practice was banned generations ago," he whispered. "No monastery keeps the script, not anymore." Luang Pi Thanom nodded slowly. And yet, he found it. He explained that the Wiwat mantra was an ancient, forbidden reversal, not of intention, but of energy, a complete inversion of a sacred chant, syllable by syllable, breath by breath. To recite it was not to pray, it was to undo prayer, not to send merit forward, but to pull echoes backward. Traditionally, fragments of the Wiwat were used in rare, dangerous exorcisms when a soul refused to pass on or a spirit clung too violently to the world. It was whispered under breath, only at night, only once. But Prasila, he had chanted it continuously for 7 nights. 7, the old monk muttered. A sacred number turned rotten. He turned the circle inside out. No one dared ask why. No one wanted to. But the answers came anyway. Buried in the temple's deepest archive, beneath rotting scrolls and termite-bitten boxes, Ham found a sealed envelope.
It bore Pra Sila's name and a title written in Old Pali, Dwara Misaka, the wrong door. Inside was a fragment of a hand-copied scripture, torn, smudged. It was written entirely in reverse, the script mirrored, impossible to read without a glass. The translated section read, "To unbind death, one must reverse life. Call not to those who are gone, for those who linger are not meant to return, and those who answer are not the ones who left." A chill fell over the temple. The animals grew restless. Birds refused to nest in the trees nearby. Dogs barked at empty corners. Cats howled, eyes locked on Pra Sila's shadow. And worse, some villagers began to show signs of possession. A woman in her 60s, mild and polite, was found muttering in the rice fields, standing ankle-deep in mud. Her eyes were open too wide. Her voice had dropped several octaves. She kept repeating the same 3 phrases. "We came when he sang. We cannot go back. He opened the door inside out." Another man was found drawing the mantra symbols in charcoal on his walls, shapes no one had taught him, characters he couldn't possibly know. He slit his tongue with a razor and said he needed to chant cleaner. They locked him in the monastery cellar. He smiled, bit off his own finger, and kept chanting. The exorcist monk gathered the remaining elders and delivered his judgment. Pra Sila had completed a full reversal cycle, which meant he had not just opened a door, but invited something in, something that could not leave unless it was given a vessel. This isn't a haunting, it's a transaction. Hum asked the question everyone feared. Why would he do this? The answer came slowly, in pieces. The abbot recalled that Pra Sila had lost a child once, long before monkhood, a son drowned during the rainy season. He had never spoken of it. But grief, when left unspoken, becomes ritual, and sometimes that ritual becomes hunger. The pieces fit together. Pra Sila had not gone mad. He had gone searching, not for enlightenment, but for someone. And when he found the chant, he used it, not to protect, not to bless, but to bargain. But the Viwat mantra doesn't give back what you lost. It gives you something that wants to wear what you lost once wore. Ham's dreams turned violent. He saw Pra Sila now with no face, only a mouth split across his head like a wound, chanting faster, backwards. And behind him, a boy, standing still, drenched, smiling too wide. Sometimes the boy opened his mouth, but Pra Sila's voice came out. Sometimes the boy wept, but in reverse. The tears pulled back into his eyes. The temple bells stopped altogether. But now the wind carried something worse, a sound like chanting without mouths, like syllables spoken through bone. One monk tried to leave. He packed his bag, tied his robe, walked down the path. They found him 2 hours later, standing naked in the pond, holding his robe like an offering, whispering backwards prayers into the water. When they pulled him out, he said only one thing. He promised peace, but not for us. That night, Pra Sila's eyes moved, just once, from left to right, and then back, like reading something that no one else could see. And when Ham entered the hall just before dawn, he saw something that broke the last of his hope. The monk's body had not shifted, but his shadow was kneeling. It was the third attempt. The cremation had to happen. The elders agreed. Prasila's body, no matter how sacred or strange, could no longer remain in the temple. Too many had heard the whispers. Too many had begun to dream of the drowned. The very air within the temple seemed thick with memory and madness. Something had to end. So they prepared the fire again. This time not in the open courtyard, but in the inner cremation pit, an ancient stone chamber, used only for monks of high discipline. 7 monks gathered. Oil was poured. Wood was stacked high. Salt was scattered in rings around the base. Mantras were recited, not once, but 3 times, forward, carefully, clearly, together. And still, the moment the flame touched the pyre, nothing was right. At first it burned, not like before. This time the fire roared. It rose high and hot. The villagers watching from a distance shielded their faces. The air shimmered with heat. But then someone noticed. There were no shadows. Not from the trees, not from the monks, not from the flames. The fire burned, but did not cast light. Only heat, only smoke. And Prasila, seated atop the pyre, remained untouched. Calm, standing behind the outer gate, watched with growing horror. The flames licked around the body, but like dancers avoiding a throne, they bent away at the last moment. The heat was unbearable, and yet not a single robe on the body burned, not a single hair curled. Worse, the body began to smile again, wider, and the lips moved, not gently now, urgently, as if finishing a chant that had never stopped. The oldest monk present, Luang Phi Tanom, stepped forward. He began reciting an old exorcism mantra in Pali, loud, forceful, pounding his staff against the earth with each verse. The other monks followed. The fire flared, then went completely still, like a photograph, frozen in motion. Then it collapsed inward, not dying, but folding, as if something had sucked it down from below. The entire pyre, wood, ash, body, vanished into the pit. Silence. Then, from the bottom of the chamber, laughter, but not human, not from one voice. It sounded like 100 mouths grinning at once. Then silence again. No remains were found. No ash, no bone, no fabric. Only a scorch mark, shaped like a handprint, spread across the stone. Fingers too long, thumb bent backwards. That night, the villagers barred their windows. Candles were lit in every home. Children were told not to speak. Even the temple cats, once lazy and half-tame, ran from the grounds and never returned. Inside the monastery, the air grew colder. Not the chill of weather, but of emptiness. Rooms no longer echoed, sound fell flat, and every reflective surface, from water bowls to mirror shards, began to shimmer faintly at dusk. If one looked too long, they swore they saw someone watching back. Not a reflection, but a presence. Then came the monk who went blind. His name was Bon Mi, a gentle, soft-voiced man who tended the altar each morning. He had sat alone in the cremation chamber after the failed ritual, trying to meditate. When he emerged, he clutched at the walls. His eyes were white, not burned, erased, like the ink of sight had been wiped away. He kept repeating one sentence. The light was wrong. The light came from under me. He died 2 days later, tongue bitten in half, hands raw from clutching his own face. Still, the bell did not ring, and still the chants echoed. Kam no longer heard them only in dreams. Now, even while awake, he heard a low, slow muttering beneath every sound. In the wind, in the dripping of water, in the rustle of trees. A reversed syllable here, a backward phrase there. As if the world was unfolding its seams, and somewhere beneath it, Pra Sila still whispered. One morning, Kam found a strange item on the temple steps, a bowl filled with blackened rice, and a single tooth balanced on top, wrapped in a scrap of red cloth. A gift, or a message, or both. He brought it to the abbot. The abbot only looked at it once and turned away and whispered, "They've accepted the offering. That means they've stayed." And now the fire had failed, the chants had failed, even the bell, the ancient sacred bell that once called the faithful to prayer, had grown silent. But the whispering, it only grew louder. At dusk, when the last monk returned from collecting alms, he found the shadow of Pra Sila standing in the courtyard, alone. No body, no sound, just the shadow. And it turned to look at him.
The silence became a second presence, thick, watching, listening. And then the smiling began. At first, it was just the boy who survived the river. He had been missing for 3 days before he returned, barefoot, soaked, silent. They found him seated in the temple courtyard at sunrise, legs crossed, eyes wide open, mud smeared across his forehead like ash. He didn't speak. He only smiled. Lips stretched unnaturally, gums exposed, teeth too white, too many. The villagers gathered around, calling his name gently at first, then with growing urgency. He did not blink, he did not flinch. He only sat there, smiling. And when someone reached out to touch his shoulder, he bit them. Fast, clean, precise. Didn't scream, didn't move, just returned to smiling. By evening, others were smiling too. 3 elders, 2 children, 1 rice farmer. No one knew why. They acted normal in every way. They cooked, they walked, they answered when spoken to. But their smiles never faded, never shifted, never matched their emotions. And when no one was looking, they whispered, not aloud, from their mouths closed. If you stood close, you'd hear it, words pressed between clenched teeth, riddles, mantras, sentences that made no sense but left a taste of rot in the air. He wears my name now. Backward is the truer way. The mouth is the gate is the prayer.
One woman reported seeing her husband standing outside the house at midnight. He was smiling, too still, too quiet. When she approached, he said only, "I've come back," but something else came too. Another girl heard laughter inside her clay jar. When she leaned close, the lid shook slightly. She opened it. Inside, a fish hook tied with human hair, and a note, "For your mouth, when it's time to open." In the temple, things worsened. A junior monk collapsed during evening prayer. They tried to revive him, but he wouldn't wake. His mouth was frozen wide open, his lips torn from the stretch, blood dripped down his chin, but no one had touched him. The abbot held his face and wept, not from fear, but from recognition. "I saw that smile before. In a dream, Procilla once confessed, of the dead returning wearing joy like a mask." The abbot ordered the temple sealed at night. No entry, no chanting, no offerings. But even from outside the gates, the sound of bells returned. Not the old bronze bell, smaller ones, ritual bells, the kind used to call spirits, not gods. They rang without rhythm, without pattern, like breathing. Calm no longer slept. He sat outside the main hall each night, clutching a talisman soaked in oil and salt. He heard them moving inside, not footsteps, but dragging, like cloth across stone, like teeth across wood, and always the same sound at the edge of hearing, smiling, not laughter, not joy, the sound of lips parting and never closing again. Then came the drawings. One morning, the temple walls were covered, symbols scratched into the plaster, not with ink or paint, but with nails, long, crooked lines, circular spirals, inverted script, some in blood, some in ash, some in something thicker. They spelled no known language, but one symbol repeated often, a wide-open mouth with no tongue and a shadow pouring out. The exorcist, Luang Pitanyam, examined them. He said nothing for hours. Then finally, "They are invitations. Someone or something is building a ritual from the inside, a mirror chant, a reversed prayer, and the smiles, they're the first sign of acceptance." That night, Kam stood by the temple gate and saw them. Figures. In the fields. At least 20, maybe more. All standing perfectly still, facing the temple. All smiling. Even from a distance, he could see their mouths gleaming under the moon. And then, slowly, they raised their hands, all at once. Palms out, fingers curled inward, like beckoning, like invitation, like mimicry. He stepped back. One of them took a step forward, then another. The others followed, silent, smiling, still. But before they reached the gates, the bell rang once, the real bell, the bronze bell, the one above the monastery, high, pure, sharp enough to split the air, and all the smiling ones froze, then turned, not all at once, but like smoke dispersing, and vanished into the trees. By morning, the bell was cracked, split clean through. It never rang again, but in its silence, something else came. Footprints, small, wet, bare, leading from the outer gate into the prayer hall, where Prasila's body had once been, where now there was only a circle of ash, and within it, a trail of teeth, laid out like offerings, each one smiling.
It was in the eyes. That's where it began to show. Not in the speech, not in the smile, not even in the skin, but in the eyes where the soul should rest, where light should return. Now they reflected nothing. The first to be noticed was the shrine boy. He had been helping the monks clean the hall, sweep the courtyard, light the morning incense. Young, obedient, quiet. But that morning, as he poured water into the lotus bowls, a monk saw his reflection missing. Not in shadow, not in motion, but in the surface of the water. The boy stood above it, but the bowl remained still. No shimmer, no ripple, no reflection, just the water, and a faint whisper from below the surface. There is no self to mirror. When they checked his eyes, they found them black. Not the pupil, all of it, like ink spilled inside glass. He blinked, he smiled, he bowed, but when asked if he was feeling well, he tilted his head and answered, "Which part of me should feel? The mouth that smiles, or the eyes that no longer see?" He was confined to the back kuti. Salt was scattered at the door, prayers were whispered in shifts, but the boy did not sleep. He sat upright all night, eyes open, unmoving. And every morning, more mirrors shattered. The cracked bell was now silent, but the reflection spoke, not with words, but with distortions. Kam saw it first in the silver offering bowl. As he leaned over to wash it, his reflection moved before he did, smiled before he could, tilted its head the opposite way, and mouthed something his own lips did not. "Let me look for you." That night, every reflective surface in the monastery was covered. Bowls, windows, polished altars, water jars. But still the monks saw things out of their corners of eyes, flickers of motion that left no sound, smiling mouths where reflections should be, shadows without sources. The abbot gathered everyone before dawn. He had received a letter from a retired scholar, a former ritual scribe who once studied the forbidden mantras of border temples near the Shan Hills. The letter was brief, terrified. It said that reversing holy chants for 7 full cycles was never meant to summon the dead. It was designed to remove the soul, not call it back. To chant backward is to untether identity, to erase the echo. What returns is not the person, it is the absence that wears their face. In the village, people began to cover their mirrors with cloth. Reflections became a superstition overnight. Children were told not to look into still water. A woman claimed she saw her dead husband in her kitchen mirror. He was cooking rice, back turned. When she reached out to touch the glass, her hand went through. The mirror did not shatter, it rippled, and on the other side, her husband turned around. He had no face, only her own, smiling back. The shrine boy stopped speaking. He began drawing on the walls, not with ink, with his fingernails, scraping symbols, spirals, mouths, eyes turned inward, all drawn upside down,
all drawn from memory, though he claimed he couldn't remember anything. When asked who he was, he answered, "I am where his gaze went when it left." They tried to restrain him, but when the rope touched his skin, it turned black, burned away, as if the air around him had forgotten heat. And then, the camera incident. A young monk, tech-savvy and curious, decided to place a camera in the hall overnight just to see, just to record. What it captured broke him. The footage showed Priscilla's shadow moving alone. The room was dark, no body, no light, only the shadow, walking slowly around the altar, pausing before each statue. And then it turned toward the camera. It stared. It smiled. It walked into the lens. Not toward, into. And the video feed went black. Not static, pitch black. Until the monk's face appeared on screen. His own face, but mirrored and smiling. The monk who recorded it went mad. He screamed that his eyes were no longer his own. He smashed every mirror in the temple with his bare hands. He pulled out his own fingernails to stop himself from drawing, and finally he tried to gouge out his eyes. They show me things I haven't seen yet. They show me what's coming back. He was sent away, but that night the camera turned on by itself. No one had touched it, and in the empty room, the camera captured one thing: a bowl of water. And in its reflection, not a monk, not a man, but a mouth, wide, dry, waiting. The next day, all reflective surfaces were removed. Even water jars were sealed, but it was already too late. Because the thing that returned through the reflections no longer needed mirrors. It had eyes. Eyes that did not reflect light. Eyes that did not blink. Eyes that stared into the soul, not out from it. Eyes that were walking among them. And Priscilla's shadow? It was no longer a shadow. It now had depth and weight. And when Kam passed the prayer hall that evening, he saw it seated where the body used to be, smiling, mouth still, but the eyes turned to follow him.
The temple had become a mouth, not metaphorically, not spiritually, but viscerally. Every doorway felt like lips, stretched wide and waiting. Every hallway echoed like a throat. Every prayer now sounded like swallowing. And at the center of it all sat the shadow. It no longer belonged to Priscilla. It no longer belonged to anything human. It sat in lotus position, still, silent. But the silence was deceptive, because something inside it was chanting. Kam could feel it, in his bones, the cadence, the rhythm, not sound, but vibration, like a mantra being hummed beneath the skin of the world. And it was calling. The abbots summoned the council. Elders, monks, scribes, the last of the spirit callers from the forest temples. They gathered in the monastery's inner sanctum, where no one had dared step since the fire failed. There, they made a decision. A sealing ritual would be performed, a final rite to close whatever Priscilla had opened, and it would require 13 monks, chanting forward, together, unbroken, for 7 hours.
each one must be pure. Each one must not have heard the full reversed mantra. Each must carry no shadow of grief, guilt, or greed. They began preparations immediately. The hall was scrubbed with salt and neem. Fresh robes were sewn by hand. The old scriptures were blessed and copied again. No electronics, no mirrors, no metal. The ritual would begin at sundown and finish only if the final syllable of the original sacred chant was spoken, in harmony, without interruption. To reseal a door, the abbot said, one must sing back everything that was unspoken. The monks assembled, young, steady, fearless, or at least willing to be afraid without breaking. They formed a circle around the altar. Candles were lit. The incense was mixed with bone ash, a safeguard from possession. Keem stood just outside the circle, holding the final sutra scroll. His role was to observe and to burn the scroll the moment the last word was spoken. If anything interrupts them, the abbot warned, we lose the gate. And what's behind it won't knock next time. It will walk in. The chanting began, steady, deep, a vibration that echoed beyond the ears, into the ribs, the teeth, the marrow. It was a holy sound, familiar, ancient, safe. But the hall did not like it. At the 1 hour mark, the candles began to flicker. At 2 hours, the walls began to sweat, not water, but oil, thick, black, oozing from the wood grain like blood from a wound. At the 3rd hour, the shadows began to move, not the monks, but others, figures that stepped between the candlelight, crawling across the walls like bruises. One monk faltered. His voice cracked, but the others held firm. They gripped their beads until blood ran down their palms. They kept chanting. At hour 4, something laughed. A deep, hollow, many-mouthed sound, not outside, not above, but beneath them. The floor pulsed, the earth breathed. From the cracks in the stone, teeth began to rise, small, human, childlike. They rolled across the floor toward the center like offerings. But the monks did not stop. Hour 5. One of the monks began to weep as he chanted. Tears poured down his face, but his voice held. Until something whispered his name, not from the room, from inside his own mouth. His body twisted. He vomited salt and fire. He burned. Quietly. His robes caught first, but made no sound. His eyes turned black, and then he collapsed, still chanting as he died. The circle remained unbroken. 12 voices continued. Kam stood frozen, scroll in hand, tears streaming down his cheeks. He saw the shadows circling. He saw the smiles widening. He saw the shadow of Fra Sila now kneeling beside the last candle, watching, waiting. Hour 6. The air grew thick. Breathing became difficult. One monk chanted with blood pouring from his ears. Another lost consciousness, but somehow kept reciting, as if something else had taken his lungs and carried the syllables. The floor turned cold. Cracks spidered outward from the altar. And then, a voice. Fra Sila's voice, but not from the shadow, from each of the monks. Their mouths moved, but the sound was his, speaking over the chant, under it, through it. He was chanting in reverse, trying to overwrite the seal, to pull the door open again, faster. The final hour began. The room was no longer a room. It was a veil, and it was tearing. One monk burst into tears and screamed as a mouth opened across his chest. Not metaphorical, not imagined, a literal, wet, smiling mouth. It whispered, "You opened me. You fed me. Now let me speak for you." Kam stepped forward. He could feel the chant pulling at the bones of the world. He could see the edge of something vast behind the altar. Not a figure, not a shape, a presence, waiting just beyond language. He clutched the scroll tighter. One page caught fire from the air alone. He saw the final monk begin to collapse. He screamed, "Finish it!" And the abbot, burned, broken, bleeding, whispered the last line of the chant, and Kam lit the scroll. The flame rose fast. The smoke turned white. The altar cracked. The oil on the walls ignited. And then, everything went silent. Not peaceful. Empty. Utterly. Completely. Silently. Empty. The next morning, the temple was blackened. The floor was scorched. The monks were gone. No bodies, no ashes, only their robes, folded neatly where they sat, and a single cracked tooth in the center of the altar, still warm, still smiling. In the days after the ritual, Wat Sai Thong no longer felt like a place. It felt like a body. Not a sacred space, not a ruin, not even a haunted shell. It breathed. The walls pulsed, slow, rhythmic, like lungs exhaling against stone. The wooden beams groaned without wind, and every floorboard creaked on its own, like bones adjusting themselves in sleep. The villagers did not return. Those who had fled stayed away. Those who had stayed behind avoided the temple path like it was cursed. Only Kam remained, not because he wasn't afraid, but because something wouldn't let him leave. His feet turned back each time. His chest tightened if he stepped beyond the gate. And in his dreams, a voice whispered, "You were part of the ritual. You are still unfinished." The temple had no monks now, only silence, only that slow, breathing quiet. And yet, offerings began to appear. Fresh rice, boiled eggs, candles. Not from the village, from nowhere. Placed gently at the base of the altar, still warm, still smoking, as if some unseen hand still performed the rituals, or some thing expected to be worshipped. Kam watched as the trees began to bend toward the monastery. Branches grew in unnatural angles, not up toward the sky, but downward, leaning in, like a canopy curling to listen. The animals avoided it now entirely. Even ants circled around the temple's base. The once cracked bell had fused itself shut, not mended, but sealed, like something had grown across it. Moss, yes, but also skin, thin, pale, veined. It twitched when touched. Each night the chanting returned. No voices, just sound. Low, guttural, as if the stone beneath the temple had learned to sing, not with joy, but with memory, and always in reverse. Calm dared to enter the main hall. It was no longer blackened. The fire damage was gone, the scorch marks erased, as if the room had shed its skin. Everything was as it had been before, but not. Brighter, cleaner, but too perfect, like a stage waiting for an actor. And then he noticed the statues. The Buddha figures, once silent and still, now had smiles. Subtle, unsettling, not carved, grown. The corners of their mouths lifted in slight, knowing curves. The eyes no longer gazed downward. They stared directly at him. He turned to leave, and the floor exhaled beneath his feet. Not a creak, not a shift, a breath. Warm, moist, close, as if he had stepped across a sleeping chest. The trees outside swayed in unison, though the wind was still. Leaves rattled like teeth in a bowl. And at the center of the courtyard, a new shrine had appeared, made of bones, twigs, thread, and fingernails. At its heart sat a bowl of black water, and in its reflection, not Kam's face, but Prasila's, smiling, unblinking, mouth closed. But his eyes moved, left, then right, then back. Kam ran. He didn't stop at the gates. He passed the trees, the fields, the outer road. He ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed in a heap of leaves, dry and panting. And still, he heard it. The breath, not his. The temples, miles away, but closer than ever. When he returned days later, the land around the monastery had changed. The path had shifted. The stone markers were gone. The trees no longer looked familiar. It was as though the temple had moved, or the world around it had. And as he stepped back through the gate, the air grew still again, heavy and full of rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. On the steps lay a scroll, new parchment, fresh ink, written in his own hand, though he had never written it. At the top, instructions for continuation. Below it, only one line. The body is gone. The breath remains. Now it needs a voice. That night, Kam sat in the prayer hall. He stared at the statues. They stared back, their smiles a little wider now. The air moved around him, not with wind, but with intention, like an area mouth opening in the dark, waiting. And then, without meaning to, he began to chant, not in fear, not in defiance, but in surrender. The syllables rolled out of him in reverse, smooth, fluent, natural, like breathing, like remembering, like being invited back. And the temple, now breathing with him, whispered its gratitude, not in words, but in warmth. And in that moment, Kam understood. The door was not sealed. The ritual was not broken. The body was never meant to decay, because the temple itself had become the monk, and Kam was its mouth.
The body was never found. Not Fray Salas, not the monks who burned, not even the boy who went blind. Only robes remained, and shadows,
And now, one of those shadows had begun to walk alone. It started steadily. Com saw it first in the reflection of the offering bowl, just a flicker, a second figure passing behind him when no one was there. He turned. Nothing. But when he looked again, the shadow moved differently than his own. Not faster, not slower, just wrong. It lagged, as if remembering how to follow. Later that week, he passed by the old incense room. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the shape of a man, seated in full lotus. Not robed, not physical, just blackness. Human-shaped, faint, but thick enough to block light. When Com stepped closer, it vanished, not into the floor, into him. He collapsed, woke with ash in his mouth, eyes red, hands blistered, and the words of the reverse chant burned into his memory. Perfect, flawless, as if he had practiced it for years. That was when the whispers returned. Not from the temple, not from the air, from his own shadow. It would stretch longer than it should, crawl up walls, move when he stood still. And when he stared at it for too long, it changed shape, from a boy's silhouette to that of a monk, robed, still, watching. He told himself it was grief, stress, a mind cracked from too much ritual and too little rest. But then the villagers began to see it too. The school teacher was the first. She came running to the temple gates just after sunset, screaming, claiming she'd seen a monk standing at her window. Not a man, not flesh, a shadow, with no body to cast it. Just a black outline of robes, floating. And when she moved to draw the curtains, the shadow smiled. No mouth, just the shape of one, wide, stretched, teeth like prayer beads. The reports multiplied. A farmer claimed he woke up choking on incense smoke, but his house had no incense. Another said she saw wet footprints in her kitchen, leading nowhere. And always the same detail. A figure standing just out of reach, not solid, not seen, but felt. The villagers gave it a name, Frey Nuang, the shadow monk. They hung charms over doorways. They stopped burning incense entirely, and most stopped calling Com by name. He had become part of it, too close, too familiar. Com felt it too. In his sleep, he dreamt of walking through the temple barefoot, but hearing two sets of footsteps. He dreamt of chanting alone, but hearing a second voice join in. His, but deeper, echoed, like hearing yourself through a well. One night, he stood in front of a mirror he had hidden, one the monks never burned. He lit a single candle, watched his own reflection flicker, and behind him, there it was, the shadow monk. Not looming, not hostile, just standing, its head slightly bowed, as if waiting. Com turned, no one there. But when he looked again, the shadow remained in the mirror, only this time it was smiling. He fell to his knees and whispered, "What do you want?" And the reflection answered, but not with sound, with movement. It raised its hand, pointed at him, then pressed its finger to its lips and vanished. The next morning, he found a note tucked into his robe,
handwritten, ancient script, same ink as Fray Sela's scrolls. It read, "You are the body, I am the memory. Together, we finish the chant." Kam's nose bled for 3 days. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. He wandered the temple like a ghost himself, and every corner had a shadow that didn't belong. The trees around Wat Sai Tong began to lean inward. Branches no longer reached for the sky. They arched toward the temple. The wind refused to enter. Not silence, rejection. Like the air itself feared being breathed by what now lived there. One afternoon, a child was seen standing just beyond the gates, barefoot, unmoving, facing the temple. When a monk approached, the child turned. His eyes were entirely black, and where his shadow should have been, stood a monk, robed, still, smiling, but upside down, feet above the ground, head swaying slowly, a tongue made of ash hanging from its mouth. The monk who witnessed it went blind within the week, claimed he couldn't stand seeing the inside of his own shadow. By now, even Kam's shadow had changed, no longer his shape, taller, still seated when he stood, smiling when he cried. And then it spoke. Not in dreams, not in whispers, out loud. Kam was standing before the altar lighting incense, and from the floor behind him, "Soon." One word, in Fray Sela's voice, sharp, familiar, final. Kam turned slowly. His own shadow rose from the ground, detached, and walked away, through the wall, leaving Kam alone, but no longer complete. That night, the temple breathed deeper than it ever had, and the shadow monk walked the halls, not as a memory, but as something reborn.
The monk came at sunset, old, frail, nearly translucent. His robes were stained from years of forest ash and rain. His back bent like the branches of the trees that refused to grow near Wat Sai Thong. And he was blind, but he knew the way. Without being led, without asking, he walked the temple path like he had walked it before, in another life. And when he stood at the gates, he whispered. The door was opened, but what stepped through was never meant to listen. No one had summoned him. No one had written. He had come because he knew. His name was Luang Po Chanarat. Once he had served as a ritual monk in the golden temples of the Thai-Laos border, a scholar of mantras so ancient they were kept in locked earth urns beneath layers of salt and prayer. He had seen possession. He had seen exorcism. He had buried monks who tried to unbury the dead. And when he stood in the prayer hall, he said only 3 words. It's still here. Kam approached cautiously. He bowed, waited. But the old monk turned his head with unnatural precision and said, "You've spoken to it, haven't you?" Kam didn't answer. He didn't have to. Chanarat removed a small clay jar from his satchel. Inside, dried lotus petals, powdered bone, a blackened coin. He spread them across the temple floor in a circular pattern, 13 petals, 13 teeth, 13 grains of salt. Then he spoke, not in Lao, not in Pali, but in a language that trembled, a tongue that made the air warp, that made the flame of the nearby candles flicker sideways. And when he finished, he looked down at the altar and whispered, "Now we know its name." Calm stepped forward. "Whose name?" The monk turned slowly. "Not a ghost, not a spirit, not your pra-sila." He knelt beside the altar, ran his hand across the stone as if reading Braille in a language only the dead remembered. And then he said, "It is called Payacham Luang, the one who waits in reverse." The name chilled the air. Even the walls contracted. A low moan passed through the floor, and the smile on the nearest Buddha statue widened. Luang Po Chanarat explained, "There are layers to the world, not just heavens and hells, but in-betweens, realms without form, without time, where echoes become entities, where prayers decay into hunger, and sometimes a chant, spoken wrong, or worse, spoken backward, pulls something from that between. Not a ghost, not a demon, but a response." "You didn't open a door," he told Calm. "You rang a bell that had not been rung in centuries, and the one who answered had been listening far too long." Payacham Luang was no deity. It did not bless. It did not curse. It mirrored. It mimicked. It took shape only when seen. It grew only when worshipped. It smiled only when feared. And pra-sila had fed it the most sacred food of all, reversed devotion. Night after night, hour after hour, chanted not from defiance, but from longing, from grief, from love twisted backwards into summoning. And now the thing had a voice, a face, a temple that breathed, a shadow that walked, and a monk, young, uncertain, faithful, who knew every word of its chant. Calm fell to his knees. Tears welled in his eyes. "I didn't mean to." The old monk placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't choose this," he said gently, "but you continued it." And then the air grew still, not quiet, hollow, as if something enormous had just turned its gaze upon the temple, from below, from behind the walls of this world. The shadows on the floor twisted into spirals. The bones at the altar cracked open, not from weight, but from breath. A hot wind blew through the chamber, carrying no scent, only meaning. And in that moment, Luang Po Chanarat said the words Calm would never forget. "It's not trying to escape, it's trying to merge." At the far end of the hall, the shadow monk appeared, not flickering, not fading, solid, robed, walking calmly across the tiles, not floating, not threatening, just arriving, as if summoned by name. And behind him he saw them, dozens of figures, smiling, silent, familiar faces now hollowed into masks, villagers, monks, children, all empty vessels echoing the same reversed hum. The candles snuffed themselves out, and still he heard the chant, not coming from mouths, but from within him, a sound that had no air, no tongue, no throat, only intention. The old monk did not panic. He stood tall for the first time in decades, back straight, eyes blind, but full of knowing. And he said to the darkness, I have seen you before, in chants that ended too early, in dreams the faithful deny, in the silence between syllables. I see you now, and I do not welcome you. Bayacham Luang did not answer in words. It stepped forward only once, and every mirror in the temple, even the ones that had been hidden, buried, shattered, cracked at once. The old monk placed a string of black beads in Kam's palm. Go to the river, speak the chant, but this time finish it. Forward, clean. Aloud? Kam asked. No, in your mind, so that it does not hear you speak it, only feel it leaving. The shadow monk was now at the altar, its head tilted, its hands open, its body flickering between Prasila's form and something larger, something wrong, like a monk remembered too late. Kam ran, past the date, past the shrine of teeth, past the trees that now bowed to the temple like loyal disciples, and behind him, the temple exhaled, a final breath, like a soul that had just found its voice.
The river waited, wide, still, black as ink, its surface unbroken, not by wind, not by insects, not even by light. It was as if the water had forgotten how to move, or worse, had been told to listen. Kam stood at the river's edge, barefoot. In his hand, a single string of black prayer beads, given to him by the old monk. Their texture was strange, warm, as if pulsing slightly with each breath he took. Not beads, teeth. Behind him, the temple loomed, silent. The air around it shimmered like heat, and from its peak, though no one stood there, the bell swung gently. No sound, only motion, like the memory of sound. Kam dropped to his knees. He could feel the chant rising in his chest. It had lived in him for too long, burrowed in through shadow, through sleep, through ritual. Now it wanted out, but not in reverse. This time, he would speak it forward. He pressed his forehead to the earth, inhaled once, and began to chant, silently, not aloud, only in the mind, each syllable sharp, pure, anchored in light. The trees behind him withered, branches curled inward, leaves turned to ash. The earth trembled, and from across the river, something rose. Not from the water, from the space above it, a figure, tall, thin, shimmering like heat above coals. Its face, ever changing, now Prasila, now the shadow, now Kam himself, smiling, always smiling. Its mouth opened, wider, wider, until it wasn't a mouth at all, but a gate, rimmed with teeth, backed by nothing. Not darkness, not void, just absence. Kam's mind screamed, but he kept chanting. Faster now, the beads in his hand grew hot. Smoke rose from his palm. His tongue ached. Though he wasn't speaking aloud, it felt as if something was being torn from it. The river began to churn. Bubbles surfaced, one after another, then popped silently. From within them, words, backward, whispers of grief, of prayers twisted in longing.
of names said one final time. The figure began to move toward him, not walking, not floating, just advancing, like a thought that would not leave, a memory trying to take shape. Kam's eyes rolled back. The mantra spilled through his mind. The holy words collided against the dark ones trying to rise, and for a moment he felt his body split, not in flesh, in voice. Two mouths, one chanting forward, one in reverse, both inside him. His hands trembled. The beads snapped. 13 black pieces scattered into the river. Each sank, and each time one disappeared, the figure slowed, shrank, folded. Then came the last line of the chant, the one Phra Sila never finished, the one that closes the prayer like stitching closes a wound. Kam saw it not in his mind, but in written script upon the sky, like flame etched into the air. He whispered it inside himself, one final time, and the figure screamed. But the scream made no sound, only silence, violent silence, the kind that knocks birds from trees, that bends grass, that splits stone. The mouth at its center collapsed, teeth shattered into dust, its body turned to smoke, and that smoke was sucked backward into nothing. Gone. Kam fell, face to the soil, eyes burning, mouth torn inside, tongue cracked, but the chant was finished, and the air was quiet. No breath, no whisper, no bell. He opened his eyes. The river was still again, still just water, still just sky. But something beside him had changed. A figure knelt next to him, not shadow, not spirit, just a man, robed, old, smiling gently, Phra Sila, but this time at peace, his mouth no longer moving, his shadow aligned, his presence warm. He bowed to Kam, placed a hand on his chest, and said, not aloud, but in his thoughts, "You finished what I could not. You sealed what I opened. I sought to bring him back, but instead I brought him in. Now I go, but you must remain, to remember, to warn, to speak only forward." Then Phra Sila turned, walked into the river, and vanished. Kam sat there until sunrise. The air tasted clean, the trees stood tall again, and the temple no longer breathed. The chanting was gone, the shadow was gone, the door was shut, but inside Kam, something still moved. A fragment, a ripple, a syllable he hadn't meant to keep, a single reversed word tucked behind his heartbeat. And sometimes when the wind was very still, he heard it, a hollow mouth asking to be opened.
Years passed. The jungle returned. Slowly, silently, vines crept back over the outer walls of Wat Sai Thong. The road that once led pilgrims to the gate faded beneath moss and dust. No one cleared it. No one visited. And yet, the temple still stood. Not ruined, not restored, just waiting. The villagers never spoke of it.
children were told only this: never follow chanting at night. Never trust a smile with no breath behind it. And if a monk's lips move after death, walk away. The bell was gone, the altar bare, the doors locked by time, not by hand. No one knew what became of Kam. Some said he left, others said he never did. A few whispered that they had seen a young monk in the forest, sitting beneath the trees, eyes closed, lips still, shadow calm. But none were brave enough to speak to him, because they feared what he might say, or worse, what he might chant. Inside the prayer hall, dust lay untouched. The statues smiled their faint secret smiles. The air was still. And sometimes, just before dawn, the wind carried something faint across the fields. Not a voice, not a song, a memory of syllables. Too soft to be heard, too heavy to forget. A mantra once spoken in the wrong direction, now folded into the silence between worlds. On certain nights, animals pause near the temple path. They tilt their heads, ears twitch, as if hearing something beneath the soil, or remembering something they were never told. In the far end of the main hall, where Pra Sila once sat, there is no body, no bones, no ash, only a stone seat, worn smooth by time. And behind it, carved faintly into the wall, a shape no one dares clean or study too closely. A mouth, open, smiling, empty. The final chant is never spoken now. It remains whole, unreversed, buried in breath, not in words, because those who know that the chant was never cursed. It was the direction that mattered, the intent, the grief, the hollow where love once lived. To chant forward is to heal. To chant backward is to beg the dead to listen. And sometimes they do, but sometimes something else does. So the temple remains, not haunted, not holy, just remembered. The wind still avoids it, the shadows do not linger, the candles refuse to stay lit, but it does not need light. It had light once, and that was how the door opened. Wat Sai Thong is not marked on any map, but if you wander far enough into the jungle, you might feel it. A warmth at your back, a stillness in the trees, a pull in your breath. And if you stop, listen very carefully, you might hear nothing. Perfect silence, heavy, waiting. And you'll know you found it, because even in the daylight, you'll feel someone watching. And when you turn, there may be no one there, only a shadow, still, seated, smiling.